Imagine throwing a massive neighborhood barbecue.
Oh, I'm in.
Right. But here's the catch. You are legally required to eat an entire ox before midnight.
An entire ox.
Yes. And having any leftovers the next morning isn't just like a faux pas. It's literally a capital offense.
That's incredibly intense.
It really is. And that's exactly what we're getting into today. We are taking a deep dive into Leviticus chapter 7.
Yes, we are.
But before we really get moving, I just want to offer a divine blessing for your day and for the week you have ahead of you. May you find clarity, purpose, and peace in whatever you are stepping into next. We are so thrilled to have you joining us.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.
Now, we've got notes from the Holman and NAA study Bibles spread out here. And, I know the immediate reaction to hearing the word Leviticus.
Oh, yeah. People usually just imagine a dusty, ancient butcher's manual.
Exactly. Because it is packed with, well, incredibly visceral rules, animal sacrifices, blood-splattering altars.
It can definitely be a tough read for modern audiences.
For sure. But our mission for this deep dive is to really look past those surface details. Because what we actually have in these texts is a highly sophisticated, honestly fascinating blueprint for community economics.
And divine justice.
Right, and arguably some of the earliest public health laws on record.
Yeah, the challenge with ancient texts is really just overcoming that cultural distance. The rituals described in Leviticus 7 feel entirely foreign to us today.
Totally. We don't really do altar sacrifices anymore.
Right, but looking at the mechanisms behind these systems, it reveals a newly formed society that is grappling with incredibly universal human issues.
Because the Israelites were out in the wilderness, right?
Exactly. They were tasked with building a civilization basically from scratch. So they had to figure out, how to handle wrongdoing, how to structure the celebration of gratitude, and just on a purely practical level, how to sustain a dedicated class of public servants.
Meaning the priesthood.
Right, the priesthood.
Yeah.
And they had to do it without a standard taxation system.
Which is such a wild problem to solve. Like, how do you balance the heavy, solemn reality of addressing a community's sins with the absolute joy of a neighborhood potluck?
It's a huge shift in tone.
And crucially, how did they make sure their clergy actually got paid?
Well, to understand that, we really need to start with the most serious category in our source material, which is the guilt and sin offerings.
Okay, so the text explicitly labels these as most holy.
Yes. That phrase, most holy, it functions as a technical boundary marker.
Meaning what exactly?
It dictates that the parameters around this specific offering are remarkably strict. So the animal must be slaughtered in the exact same location as the burnt offering, and the blood is splattered around the altar.
Wow, okay.
And then very specific portions of the animal are burned on the altar and dedicated completely to God. The text singles out all the fat tail, the fat covering the internal organs, both kidneys and the lobe of the liver.
Wait, let's pause on those specific parts for a second. Why just the kidneys and the liver lobe? That seems so incredibly particular.
I know it does. But in the ancient Near Eastern understanding of anatomy, the internal organs, specifically the kidneys and the liver, were considered the seat of the emotions and the conscience.
Oh, interesting. So kind of like how we use the heart metaphorically today.
Exactly like that.
Ah.
So offering them was this deeply symbolic act of yielding one's innermost being to God.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Right. And additionally, the fat tail of Middle Eastern sheep, it's this massive appendage. Sometimes it weighs up to 30 pounds.
30 pounds of just fat.
Just fat. It was considered the richest, most prized part of the animal. So burning these parts was a visceral demonstration of giving the absolute best and the most vital components over to the divine.
Wow. Which brings us to the economic engine of this whole system, really, because the worshiper bringing this guilt offering doesn't get to eat any of the meat, right?
No, none of it.
Instead, it goes to the officiating priest. And the text says it can only be eaten by the male priests, and it must be consumed in a designated holy place.
That's right. It's a very restricted, solemn meal.
But there is one detail in the Holman notes that completely caught me off guard here.
Oh, the hide.
Yes. The text mandates that the priest offering a burnt offering gets to keep the animal's skin, the hide.
I was reading that like, wait, are these ancient priests running a side hustle in leather goods?
It sounds like it, doesn't it? But you have to remember, the Bronze Age economy functioned very differently from ours. Leather was essentially hard currency.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about it like that.
Yeah, and the priestly class, the tribe of Levi, they were unique among the Israelites because they did not receive a traditional land inheritance.
Right, so no massive farms, no sprawling pastures to raise their own vast herds.
Exactly. No way to generate generational agrarian wealth. Their full-time occupation was managing the spiritual, legal, and physical well-being of the camp.
Which means, logically, no land equates to no steady income. If you can't grow crops, you can't eat, and you don't have anything to trade.
And that is exactly the problem this system solves, because the hide of an animal was incredibly valuable. I mean, I guess it was the raw material for basically everything, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Clothing, tents, waterskin sandals.
Yeah.
By legally granting the hide to the officiating priest, the system guarantees that the individual performing the immediate labor is directly compensated.
With a highly liquid, tradable asset.
Precisely. It is a highly structured provision system that's just kind of masquerading as a purely religious ritual.
That totally reframes the bizarrely specific rules around the grain offerings, too.
Oh, the grain offerings are fascinating.
Because the text gets incredibly granular here, no pun intended.
Nice.
It dictates that if a grain offering is baked in an oven or cooked in a pan or made on a griddle, it goes exclusively to the specific priest who offered it.
Right.
But if the grain offering is just mixed with oil or left completely dry, it is divided equally among all the sons of Aaron.
Yep.
Why does an ancient religious text care so much about the cooking method of bread when it's determining compensation?
Well, it comes down to the shelf life of the food.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, it dictates this brilliant balance between individual reward and a communal safety net. So think about it. An oven-baked cake or bread cooked in a pan, that's a finished, perishable product.
Right. It needs to be eaten immediately before it goes stale or gets moldy.
Exactly. Therefore, it goes straight to the priest who is currently on duty, providing his immediate caloric needs for that specific day's labor.
But the dry grain.
Dry grain is non-perishable. You can store it in jars for months, sometimes even years.
So the dry grain functions like a long-term treasury, or like a savings account for the priests.
A communal savings account, yeah. The dry grain supports the entire extended priestly family. That includes those who aren't currently on rotation, the aging ones, or...
Oh, and the historical notes point out priests who had physical defects that prevented them from officially serving at the altar.
Yes. It is, quite literally, a built-in ancient social security system, and it's funded entirely by the everyday worship of the community.
That is just brilliant. Okay, so we have this deeply solemn, restricted meal for the priests, dealing with the heavy weight of guilt and daily survival.
Right.
But then the text shifts gears completely. We move into the peace offering, which is also translated as the fellowship offering.
This is where things get really fun.
Yeah, suddenly the everyday worshiper finally gets to eat the meat. The atmosphere changes from this somber ritual to something resembling a massive festival.
The tonal shift is profound. Guilt offerings, as we said, are designed to restore a broken relationship. But peace offerings are designed to celebrate a relationship that is already intact and flourishing.
It's a voluntary act of joy.
Exactly. And the study Bibles break this down into 3 distinct subcategories, based entirely on the worshiper's motivation.
Okay, what are they?
First, there is the thanksgiving offering, which is given in gratitude for a specific blessing or rescue. Then there's the vow offering, fulfilling a promise made during a time of distress.
Got it.
And finally, the free will offering, which is really simply an expression of spontaneous joy and devotion.
Okay, but I have to push back on a major detail here, or at least admit some real confusion on my part.
Sure, what is it?
So, I've always read that yeast is the ultimate taboo in ancient biblical sacrifices.
It usually is, yes.
Right, because leaven usually represents corruption or sin or pride because it puffs things up and fundamentally alters the dough.
That's the standard symbolic interpretation, yeah.
But for the Thanksgiving peace offering, the text mandates unleavened cakes and wafers, sure, but then it explicitly requires the worshiper to also bring cakes of leavened bread made with yeast.
It does.
Why is leavened bread suddenly on the menu in the middle of a holy sanctuary?
It's a great question, and context is the key to resolving that paradox.
Yeah.
Leaven was strictly forbidden from being burned on the altar itself.
Okay.
Nothing fermenting, decaying, or artificially puffed up could be offered directly to God as a burned portion. However, the peace offering is unique.
Because they actually eat it.
Exactly. The vast majority of the food involved in a peace offering never touches the altar fire. It goes straight onto the community's dinner table.
Ah, so the yeast rule only applies to divine consumption, not human consumption.
You nailed it. The leavened bread is part of a festive communal meal. God is essentially instructing the people to bring the good, soft, risen bread that they actually enjoy eating and to use it for celebration.
I love that.
Yeah, it demonstrates that the divine desire isn't just for solemn, flavorless deprivation.
Mhm.
There is an active endorsement of human joy, of abundance, and the sharing of delicious food in the presence of the community.
But, and this is a big but, that joy comes with a wildly aggressive ticking clock.
Yes, the expiration
The
dates.
expiration dates on these meals are shockingly strict. For a Thanksgiving offering, the text dictates that the meat must be eaten on the exact same day it is offered.
Same day.
No leftovers until morning, period.
None.
And for the vow or free will offerings, the worshiper gets a slightly longer runway. It can be eaten on day 1 and day 2, but anything left over on the third day must be taken out and burned. I
Right.
mean, it feels like an ancient health inspector is breathing down their necks.
Well, the penalty for ignoring those timelines is remarkably severe. The text declares that if a person eats the meat on the third day, the entire sacrifice becomes unacceptable.
The Hebrew word used in the notes is pigul, right?
Yes, pigul, which translates roughly to something abominable, spoiled, or thoroughly profaned.
Wow.
And eating it actually brings iniquity back onto the person. It effectively reverses the entire blessing of the sacrifice.
Okay, so what is the underlying logic here? Is this strictly an ancient equivalent of a health code?
It is a masterful synthesis of theology and pragmatic reality. On the practical side, the Israelites are operating in the ancient Near East, often in brutal desert heat, long before the invention of refrigeration.
Right. Meat is going to spoil.
Exactly. It spoils and harbors deadly bacteria incredibly fast under those conditions. So banning the consumption of 3-day-old meat is absolutely a matter of public health.
It prevents widespread foodborne illness from sweeping through a densely packed camp.
Precise.
Right, but I keep thinking about the sheer volume of food. How do you physically consume an entire cow or a sheep in a single day? A cow yields hundreds of pounds of edible meat.
It does.
Even a really hungry family couldn't make a dent in that before the midnight deadline.
No, they absolutely cannot. And that physical impossibility is actually the genius of the entire design.
Really?
Yeah. Think about it. If a worshiper brings a Thanksgiving offering, they are physiologically incapable of consuming it alone before the deadline.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
And they cannot salt it, they can't cure it or hoard it for the winter. So the strict one-day limit forcefully engineers generosity.
That is incredible.
The worshiper must immediately invite their extended family, their neighbors, the local Levites, and the poor and marginalized in the camp to come and share this massive influx of food.
Wow. It takes a private, internal feeling of gratitude and structurally transforms it into a massive, instant feast for the vulnerable.
Exactly.
You cannot just be privately thankful. Your thankfulness literally has to feed the neighborhood.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
That is an absolutely brilliant social mechanism. But, even in the midst of this huge, joyful community feast, the text throws up a massive stop sign.
The taboos.
Yes, it introduces 2 non-negotiable dietary prohibitions that apply no matter where the worshiper is or what kind of meal they are having.
Right.
There is an absolute ban on eating fat and an absolute ban on eating blood.
And the instructions are emphatic. The text specifies the fat of an ox, a sheep, or a goat, and the blood of any bird or animal whatsoever.
And this applies whether the person is at the central sanctuary or just sitting in their own private tent.
Exactly. It is a universal blanket rule for the entire community.
Which is fascinating because if you go to a cardiologist today, trimming the fat off your steak is just standard common sense advice to lower your cholesterol.
Sure, yeah.
But here in Leviticus, ignoring this rule is a capital offense.
It is.
The stated punishment is being cut off from the people. And the study note suggests this signifies total excommunication from the worshiping community, isolation from family, or even premature death by divine intervention.
It's as serious as it gets.
Why were fat and blood treated with such extreme life or death reverence?
Grasping this really requires stepping into the core of the ancient worldview. Blood was never viewed as just a biological fluid pumping through veins.
What was it then?
It was recognized as the literal, tangible life force of the creature. And life, in its essence, belongs exclusively to the Creator.
Okay, that makes sense.
Furthermore, the blood was designated specifically to be used on the altar for atonement. It was the sole mechanism for making peace and restoring balance.
So because it held that profound sacred function, it was just too holy for casual human ingestion.
Exactly. Consuming blood was seen as usurping the divine prerogative over life and death.
Wow. So blood represents the sacredness of life. What is the theological weight of the fat then? Why is that equally forbidden?
Well, in the agrarian ancient world, fat was not viewed through the lens of modern diet culture as something unhealthy to be avoided.
Right, they wanted the calories.
They needed them.
Yeah.
Fat was the richest, most luxurious, most caloric, and most valuable part of the animal. It represented the ultimate abundance of the harvest.
Well,
So the theological principle here is that the absolute best, rightfully, belongs to God alone. Reserving the fat for the altar served as a physical, daily reminder to the Israelites that their wealth, their food, and their ultimate abundance were gifts from the divine.
it wasn't just the product of their own hard work.
Exactly.
Now, there is a fascinating, highly practical exception noted right in the middle of these intense bans, though.
The dead animals.
Yeah. The text clarifies that the fat of an animal that dies naturally in the field or is torn apart by wild beasts obviously cannot be eaten,
Right.
but it can be used for other everyday purposes. Like a person could use that fat as grease for their tools or to lubricate the axle of a cart or to fuel a lamp.
And that exception proves that these laws are not based in some magical anti-material superstition. The text is highly practical.
It's just about what goes in your mouth.
Right, the prohibition is specifically against eating the fat of sacrificial animals. It is a boundary concerning what belongs to the Lord's table versus the human table.
But if an animal dies a natural death, its carcass can still serve human labor.
Exactly. The material world is still useful. It shows a really nuanced understanding of how the sacred and the mundane coexist.
All right, let's tie this entire ecosystem together.
Let's do it.
We know the fat and the blood go to the altar. We know the everyday worshiper and their invited community get to eat the vast majority of the meat before the deadline.
Yep.
But how do the priests actually participate in these joyous peace offerings? How is the clergy supported when the community is throwing these massive Thanksgiving festivals?
This brings us to the famous wave and heave offerings.
The Hebrew terms are tenepha and teruma, right?
That's right. These concepts are the final pieces of the economic support system we were analyzing earlier, with the hides and the grain.
And the detail that stands out immediately in the notes is the physical requirement placed on the worshiper.
It's very specific.
The text insists that the person bringing the sacrifice must carry the fat and the meat to the priest with their own hands.
Yes.
You cannot hire a proxy. You cannot send a servant to drop it off. It emphasizes the deeply voluntary, personal nature of the gift.
It's a very intimate moment.
So the worshiper walks up, and the breast of the animal is presented as a wave offering. That is the tenepha. And it is assigned to Aaron and all his sons.
Right, and the breast was an incredibly prime, substantial cut of meat. By assigning it to the broader priestly family, it provided a regular, high-protein salary that sustained the larger community of religious workers.
Not just the guy standing at the altar.
Exactly.
And then the right thigh or the right hind leg is given as a contribution or heave offering, the teruma. And that specific, valuable cut goes directly to the officiating priest. The specific individual who is actively splattering the blood and burning the fat on the altar.
That's his immediate payment.
I'm just trying to visualize the actual mechanics of this moment. The worshiper literally carries this heavy raw meat, physically waves it or elevates it back and forth as if saying, God, I am giving this entirely to you.
Yes.
And God symbolically accepts it only to immediately redirect it, essentially saying, thank you, I accept your gift. Now physically hand it over to my staff so they can eat.
That is exactly what's happening. The physical motion is entirely the point.
Yeah.
The words tenepha, meaning presentation or wave, and teruma, meaning contribution or heave, they denote a solemn physical dedication.
Wow.
By forcing the worshiper to hand-deliver the absolute best cuts of meat to the priest while looking them right in the eye, the system transforms what could have been a cold, impersonal tax into a deeply tactile, relational interaction.
It's not just mailing a check to the IRS.
Exactly. It forged a direct, psychological bond of gratitude and mutual provision between the everyday citizen and their spiritual leaders.
And the text makes it explicitly clear that this was not a temporary wilderness measure.
No, not at all.
It was established right there on Mount Sinai as a perpetual statute, a permanent salary or prebend ordained to outlast their time in the desert.
Right.
The ongoing survival and support of the community's leaders was hardwired directly into the community's greatest moments of celebration. You couldn't throw a party without feeding the people who served you.
When you step back and observe the entire machinery of Leviticus 7 working together, the economic safety nets, the public health mandates, the forced generosity, It dramatically changes how you view these ancient lists of
It
rules.
really does.
They are not arbitrary hurdles. They are the architectural blueprints of a cohesive society.
It fundamentally changes the reading experience. I mean, I think it is time to summarize the journey we have just taken through these notes.
I think so too.
We opened Leviticus 7 expecting a dry, outdated list of ancient butcher's rules. But what we uncovered within these laws, delivered at Mount Sinai laws, covering the burnt, grain, sin, guilt, and peace offerings, was an absolute masterclass in holistic community building.
Truly.
We saw how the specific rules for grain offerings and animal hides ensured that landless priests were fairly compensated for their daily labor, while simultaneously creating an early economic safety net for their extended families.
Yeah, that social security system.
We saw how the strict expiration dates on the peace offerings took a private feeling of thanksgiving and engineered it into forced communal generosity, feeding the hungry while doubling as a brilliant ancient food safety law.
Right, the one-day BBQ rule.
And we saw how the absolute, uncompromising bans on fat and blood kept the entire community anchored in the profound reverence of God as the ultimate exclusive source of life and abundance.
The interconnectedness of the system is just remarkable.
It really is.
And as we conclude this analysis, it leaves us with a compelling question to consider for our own lives.
Ooh, what is it?
Well, in our modern world, our transactions are almost entirely invisible. We use apps, digital transfers, direct deposits.
Zipmo, everything.
Even our charitable giving and our support for local community leaders are often automated. They're deducted without us ever touching a physical dollar or looking someone in the eye.
Wow, that's so true.
So what would it fundamentally change about our local communities and the posture of our own hearts if our acts of gratitude required the same level of deliberate, tactile, own hands involvement as the ancient Israelites?
That is a profound thought, and definitely something that will stick with me. The difference between looking someone in the eye and handing over your provision versus just clicking a button on a screen.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. We love digging into these texts with you and uncovering the timeless, surprisingly practical wisdom buried right beneath the surface. And as we close out our deep dive today, we want to leave you with this final truth. God blesses all the listeners. Take care.